Good morning, Anthem. Good to see you here this morning. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Just a word before we begin. In January 5 to 13, Loma Linda University Church and Anthem is going to have a very special spiritual renewal event. It's entitled Unbelievable. It's looking at the gospel throughout Scripture. There are 3 speakers who will be joining us. It will be a very meaningful experience. Some of you know the speakers, Ty Gibson, David Asherick, and Jeffrey Rosario. We look forward to this time. You can find all the information on our website. We hope that you will plan to join us to start the new year in a deeply spiritual and positive way. January 5, it begins. Just look at our website. So if you've been joining us week to week during the Advent season here at Anthem, you know that each week we've been listening to a story. That has ended our time each week. Today it begins our time, taken from the pages of a book written by Paul Arat called More of Paul Harvey's The Rest of the Story. It's entitled Knowing by Heart. These are Arat's words. The evening of June 25, 1886, Rio de Janeiro. The Brazilians versus the Italians, and the Italians were losing. Not a war with guns, not a sporting event, an opera. The brawl had begun in the hall even before the curtain had risen, and on both sides of the curtain, total confusion, shrieking, stamping, whistling, jeering. Just what pushed these ordinarily sensible artists and opera goers to the brink of physical violence is the rest of the story. First, the performers. A touring Italian opera company organized by impresario Carlo Rossi. Since this was going to be a tour of Brazil, Signor Rossi, minding his diplomacy, was careful to choose a Brazilian as chief conductor. Leopoldo Miguez was his name. Naturally, most of the opera singers, as well as the first chair orchestra members and the chorus master and the assistant conductor, were Italian. It was an Italian opera company. So there they were in Brazil, mostly Italian performers with a Brazilian star conductor. The first performance in Rio was the opera Faust. The next day's newspapers' reviews were scathing. No one in the touring company was happy. The Italian performers blamed their Brazilian conductor, calling him personally overbearing and musically incompetent. Simultaneously, the Brazilian conductor sent an open letter to the newspapers. The performance had been sabotaged, he said, by the foreigners in the company. The foreigners meaning the Italians. The conductor's letter further stated that he was withdrawing from the company. That brings us to June 25. The scheduled opera, Aida. Everyone in the audience has read the published complaint of their hometown conductor. Not only had the Italians insulted him, they reasoned, but in so doing, they had offended all of Brazil. What we have here is the makings of a war. The opera goers, the culture crowd, ordinarily polite, sedate, have blood in their eyes. The assistant conductor, whose job it is to carry on, steps to the podium in the orchestra pit. There's a rustling of programs as the audience searches for his name in print. Assistant conductor, Superti, an Italian. Before Superti can raise his baton, a wave of jeers and whistles washes over him. Superti storms from the pit. Now it's the impresario Rossi's turn. Planning to smooth the ruffled feathers with a kind word or two, he strides before the lowered curtain. Rossi, another Italian. And he too is drowned out, chased away. Backstage is humming, and not musically. Who is left to take over? Moments later, the chorus master edges his way toward the podium. The whispered word travels like wildfire through the audience. Chorus master, another rustling of programs. Chorus master, Venturi. Yet another Italian, an explosion of stomping and hooting. Goodbye, Venturi. Backstage once more, singers are weeping. Impresario Rossi is pacing. If this concert is canceled, the entire tour may be canceled as well. That would leave a lot of folks with no money and on the wrong side of the Atlantic to suit them. Meanwhile, back in the pit, one of the musicians stands, points. What about him? Let him try. He knows the opera by heart. The object of this sudden outburst is a 19-year-old cellist buried in the back section. A nobody. That he had at the tour's onset been rather casually designated assistant chorus master is hardly a recommendation in and of itself, but this is no time for credentials. In seconds, he's being swarmed by the desperate opera cast. If not he, then who would bail them out? Elbowing his way through the confusion, Impresario Rossi approaches the bewildered young man. Even at a distance, the message is clear. Get out to that podium and do something, anything. The back row cellist obeys. As he rises before the conductor's desk, the audience is distracted from its turbulence. Who is this now? A cello player, someone says. An Italian? Who knows? He's not listed in the program. He might even be Brazilian. The musician who had singled him out was right about one thing. He, the young man, does know the opera by heart. So much the better. With a flourish, the slender, dark-eyed youth closes the score in front of him. What's this? By memory? And as the strings begin the opening bars of Aida, pianissimo, a real-life legend is born. The young man, the obscure cellist who rose to the occasion, making it and himself a success, was almost not there that night. He had planned to play hooky from that particular performance. Buried back in the cellos, he would not have been missed. Instead, he was besieged by his conscience, his musician's sense of duty. And because he showed up for the performance that evening, he awakened the next morning to critical acclaim and to his new post as chief conductor for the remainder of the tour. It was only after the opera had finished that the audience learned that he too was Italian. But by then, in the wake of a splendid performance, it made little difference. Time alone would tell that the slender 19-year-old with the deep, dark, penetrating eyes, the obscure cellist who almost missed the opportunity of a lifetime, was destined to become the greatest conductor who ever lived, Arturo Toscanini. Now, just in case you missed class the day the professor lectured on Toscanini, just know this. His musical brilliance was unparalleled. His memory, stellar. It is believed that he conducted 117 full operas and 480 concert pieces, both in practice and rehearsal and in live performances, completely by memory. Stunning. But it's not that causes me to share his story today. What causes me to share his story today is that he was back there, somewhere on the back row of the cello section, buried, forgotten. Because we've been wandering around the nativity scene, looking at the often overlooked characters of Christmas, forgotten. Joseph, the neglected man who told us, humble background people God uses in marvelous ways. Or Zechariah, who told us, when you are silenced, forgotten, God forms you, grows you. Or what about last week with Simeon, who said, even if you wait an entire lifetime, just waiting, ultimately, God will fulfill his promise. And today, Simeon has barely finished the words before an elderly woman, probably stooped, gray wisps of hair peeking out from under her shawl, elbows him out of the way and says, I have something to say. Neglected, Forgotten. Her name is Anna. Luke tells her story, Luke's Gospel, the 2nd chapter. It's very brief, 3 verses long, just simply a cameo appearance. Here's what Luke writes. There was also a prophet, Anna, daughter of Penuel of the tribe of Asher. She was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage and then was a widow until she was 84. She never left the temple but worshiped night and day, fasting and praying. Coming up to them at that very moment, she gave thanks to God and spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Jerusalem. Simeon's still speaking. She ambles up, realizes what is happening. No doubt hears Simeon's words. Says, I have something to say. Now, Luke doesn't tell us exactly what her emotional state was, what her life was like. The one clue he gives us that is evident, because he states it, is that she gave thanks to God. So we know there was a sense in her of gratitude. But he gives us certain other clues as to who she is. 3 words or groups of words. The first one in verse 37 says, she was very old. Now, in the original, in the Greek, Luke uses language meant to underline her age. That's why the NIV translates that she was very old. So what is it like for those of us who've pulled more pages off the calendar than we care to admit? What happens as age catches up to us? Isn't it true that slowly you get moved off the center stage to the fringes? No longer a part of the key realities of what's happening, except that now hearing becomes a bit muffled. So you miss a lot of what's happening. But when you do catch it, you realize this terminology, this lingo that they're using, I don't understand. Are they speaking English? Can you tell me what they mean? Further marginalized until finally forgotten. That's one thing Luke gives us a window into. But secondly, he says there, going back to verse 36, she was very old. She had lived with her husband 7 years after her marriage, and then she was a widow till she was 84. Widow. It's such an emotionally evocative word. You know what it means. A doctor who says, ma'am, I'm really sorry to tell you, but a doorbell at midnight, an officer who stands there and says, we think the other driver was drunk. Silent sanctuary, quiet tones of the organ, muffled sobs, friends and family. And yet then the bald truth of the statement, you really know who your friends are when you grieve. Because life goes on. People go back to school, back to work, back to family. And then that word sears her soul. Widow. Forgotten. But there are 2 other words that give us a glimpse into Anna's soul. Starting in verse 37, Luke says she never left, those 2 words, she never left the temple but worshiped night and day, fasting and praying. Never left. You know what it's like. You've seen it if you haven't experienced it. That person who's marginalized, who's forgotten, who's alone, who's lonely, every time the doors open, there they are. They've come to church because that means some kind of human contact. That means some kind of horizontal connection, but it also means the vertical connection. Maybe here I can experience God. That was Anna, never left. Clearly, Luke is being hyperbolic. He is just saying to us constantly, continually, every time the temple doors open, there she was. What's her name? Anna. Ah, Anna's always here. William Barclay says we know two things about Anna from reading these pages, these words rather. We know, first of all, that she knew sorrow, but not bitterness. She knew what it meant to grieve, but she hadn't grown bitter. How's that possible? Secondly, Barclay says she knew age, but not hopelessness. Even though all the years had passed, how in the world had she managed to maintain hope? Well, Barclay says the text answers for us. Answers in those two words, never left. You see, she just kept praying and she just kept worshiping. And because she kept praying and because she kept worshiping, she was able to know sorrow without bitterness and age without hopelessness. Thus her footsteps become guides for so many who know both sorrow and the growth of age. She never left. So there's a quote that I wanted to read to you. Saved it in my computer file for years. Went and found it, and it had the designation author unknown. I thought, well, that was years ago. By now, we've got AI, right? AI will tell me who the author is. So I typed into my Chatster, that's my AI app, who authored this statement? And then I cut and pasted the quote. It answered. This statement is attributed to American writer and philosopher Samuel Ullman. But right there beneath that was this little button that said, tell me more. So I clicked on it. Then it said, apologies for the confusion. The statement is actually attributed to American clergyman and social reformer Henry Van Dyke. Little button, tell me more. Well, not feeling quite as confident now, I clicked the button. Got this. I apologize for the incorrect information. After further research, it appears that the statement you provided is often attributed to American writer and philosopher Douglas MacArthur. Writer and philosopher? Wasn't he a general? All right. However, it's important to note that the origins are somewhat uncertain. By now, definitely not as confident. One last time, I clicked on the Tell Me More button. I apologize for the confusion. By the conflicting information, after thorough research. Really? In the last 3 seconds? After thorough research, it seems that the statement you provided does not have a specific author. It's sometimes attributed to Ullman or Van Dyke or MacArthur, but the exact origin remains unclear. So today I'm going to tell you this is a quote from Randy Roberts. Actually, I think this could be a quote from Anna, because it captures the reality of this elderly woman who had known sorrow but not bitterness, who had known age but not hopelessness. And because she kept praying and kept worshiping, she encountered the baby in the temple. Here's the quote. You're as young as your faith, as old as your doubt. As young as your self-confidence, as old as your fear. As young as your hope, as old as your despair. So long as your heart receives messages of beauty, cheer, courage, grandeur, and power from the earth, from humans, and from the infinite one, so long are you young. But when the wires are all down and all the central place of your heart is covered with the snows of pessimism and the ice of cynicism, then you are grown old indeed, and may God have mercy on your soul. I think that's Anna. You know what else I think? I think Anna shuffled on her cane into the temple and encountered the baby. But I think she skipped out of the temple, full of all the vibrancy of heartfelt youth, and went out to tell everyone who would listen, I found the baby. The baby changed my life. and can change your life.